Okay, so our next one is the history of the church in Ethiopia. The history of the church in Ethiopia. And as I said to you, I really want to learn from you. That's what I want to do. So I will proceed to look at the document that I've been working on. And then, as we look paragraph by paragraph, I want to hear from you if I need to make some change. Yeah, so I will want feedback from you as we are going on so that we finish this. I'm hoping that we can finish it quick enough so that we can move on to the concluding matters. We'll take a break after we go through the Ethiopian church history, and then when we come back, it's basically just wrapping up. And I have 2 slides to go through, and then I will want feedback from you, and it will be the feedback that says what is the most important lesson you yourself as an individual have picked up, which is practical for you, which has challenged you, and so on. Okay, so that's the way we will proceed. So I have questions because I'm reading, discovering things as we're going along. And one of them is that Abyssinia was the old name for Ethiopia, which was southeast of Nubia, which was, that is Nubia, was south of Egypt. And that in the 1st century, the northern city of Aksum, now in one of the books I've read here, the spelling seems to be different. It's A-K-S-U, so you'll tell me which one you normally use, was an important trading city, especially in Ivory. Is that fair? Am I correct about that first name? Okay, excellent. And then, to my surprise, one of the books I read said that the Ethiopian eunuch, about the Ethiopian eunuch in the Bible, first of all, it's the longest section dealing with any African, which is correct, but that it says he was actually from Nubia rather than from Ethiopia. Have you ever heard that? Okay, so it could be true. I mean, you know, since you've heard it, I'll leave it as a question hanging. Yes? Okay. Yeah, with a region instead of national boundaries. National boundaries came much later. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much. I'm learning. It is said that Origen, who lived from 185 to 253, wrote about the gospel being preached to the Ethiopians, in which case now I can even remove this question mark because of what you have said there. So basically it's the same peoples. Then the gospel arrived in Abyssinia in the 4th century through a young Christian man named Frumentius. He was originally from Tyre. While on a return trip from India, he was captured as a slave to serve the king in Aksum. He was later released because of his faithfulness to his work. He banded together with some traders and formed a church. When he traveled to Alexandria to ask for a pastor for this same church, he himself was ordained as a bishop in 356 AD. Through his labors, many came to Christ. Even the king was converted. A large church building was put up, and Christianity became the official religion of the kingdom. Sounds okay? Thank you. Around 480 AD, some 9 missionaries arrived from the Syrian church who were monophysites, believing in only one nature of Christ. They taught their views to the church in Abyssinia, and thus this became their belief. The Coptic Church of Ethiopia still holds on to that view today. Then in the 6th century, the Bible was translated into, do you say Ge'ez? Ge'ez, okay, into Ge'ez language spoken by the people of Axiom. Thus, the people were able to read the Bible in their mother language and grow their faith in this way. This went a long way to save the church in Abyssinia when it was attacked. Okay? So that takes us into the 700s now. From 700 to 1300 AD, very little is known about the church in Abyssinia, Ethiopia, or Nubia. Then Nubia in the north fought off the Muslims from 600 to 1200 AD. That was when they were now attacking the north of Africa. In the meantime, Abyssinia was invaded by pagans from the south who destroyed their cities. So during this period, the rebuilding of the cities occupied the people of Abyssinia. The monks of the Coptic Church were also busy building the famous historic rock-hewn churches in Roha. Abyssinia then fought back the pagans in the south and gained more territory for their kingdom. Thus, they moved their capital from the north, the province of Tigray, to the more central area, province of Amhara. Now, is this where Amharic comes from in terms of the word? Okay. The Muslims sought to come in from the Red Sea, which is now not from the north, but from sort of northeastern side. But successive kings of Ethiopia fought them and contained them across the 14th century. So that is now in the 1300s. However, at the start of the 16th century, the Muslims attacked from Somali using firearms provided by the Arabs, and they captured Aksum. They burnt down the homes and the churches and forced the people to convert to Islam. It is said that 9 out of 10 men turned to Islam, while the others remained true to Christianity. The king appealed to Portugal to send soldiers to help the Christians in Abyssinia. Help finally arrived in the form of 400 soldiers in 1541, and 2 years later, in 1543, the Somali chief was killed, and the territory that had been captured by the Muslims was recovered. The Coptic Church of Ethiopia was saved from total annihilation. It is worth stating that Islam had swept Christianity largely out of North Africa by the time of the Reformation. Okay, so we've already started. Apart from the Coptic Church in Egypt and Ethiopia, there was little known about Jesus Christ in the rest of Africa at this point. Okay, so clearly Ethiopia received the Christian faith much, much earlier than the rest of Africa and sustained it when the rest of Africa was in darkness. After the Portuguese saved Ethiopia from Muslim invasion, they sent missionaries into the kingdom. The first missionary arrived in 1603, whose name was Paez. Now you remember, this is the time that there are fresh efforts through Prince Henry in West Africa and going down to South Africa and so on. So it's more or less the same time. The first missionary arrived in 1603, whose name was Paez. The king did not easily welcome the missionaries from Portugal because they were Roman Catholics. He did not want them to influence the Coptic Church. However, Paez worked diligently, learning the Ge'ez language and evangelizing the people. Just before he died, the king publicly professed the Roman Catholic faith. Mendez came from Portugal to replace Pius. He tried to change the Coptic church so that it became Roman Catholic, and disaster occurred. This resulted in a civil war that only ended when the king stepped down and his son took over. And his son made the pronouncement that the Coptic church would remain as such. Having said this, it is also worth noting that in fact, the Coptic church also venerated the Virgin Mary and were also full of religious rituals. The main outward difference lay in their mode of worship. For the Coptics, it was largely influenced by African traditional religions. And then secondly, the leadership for the Coptics was totally indigenous. It was an African church in that sense. Let's proceed. The earliest Protestant missionary was Peter Hailing, who arrived in Gonda via Egypt in 1634. He worked within the Coptic church, seeking to revitalize it. He translated the Gospel of John in Amharic. He left in 1652, which was just under 20 years, and was killed, not milled, sorry. Yeah, he was killed in Egypt by the Pasha, whoever they were, whoever he was. His followers formed a brotherhood called the Evangelical Association. So that was within the Coptic Church. In 1829, now that's quite a leap from 1652, as I thought. Two missionaries from the Church Missionary Society, that's, in fact, I can even put it in brackets here, that it was Anglican, arrived, namely Samuel Gobert and Christian Kugler. They distributed the scriptures in Amharic. Now, from what I read, Christian did not last. Within a year, he went back. Gobert lasted a little longer, and then when he went back to England, he returned with Johann Krapf to Shoa among the Oromo. A community of Christians was established among the Falasha and were probably the first evangelical Protestant church in Ethiopia. By 1912, there were 2,000 of them in terms of within this grouping. Yes? Okay. Okay, so that same translation that is up there, Gospel of Mark into Amharic, so they may have added one or two more books and then distributed. Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, the bit that you mentioned, because I don't have it anywhere, could we put it somewhere? Yes. So I want to say so that was now the entire scriptures we're talking about. Okay, so the entire Bible was only translated, okay, in the late 1880s, and okay, by an Ethiopian monk.
His name was Abba Abraham, and he translated it mainly from Ge'ez.
Abba Abraham, like that. Okay. Okay. And you said he did so from
He consulted both the
Ge'ez, Greek, and so you said he was a monk in Jerusalem. Okay. Okay. An Ethiopian monk. All right. Thank you very much. If I get paid for this, we'll share the money. All right. Now, one of the things I tried to avoid was to learn about all the kings and emperors and so on that were coming down the line until we came to Haile Selassie, simply because him I already knew. So that's how I factored him in here. And I said Haile Selassie was regent from 1916 to 1930 and emperor from 1930 to 1974. He gave considerable freedom to foreign missionaries in the 1920s and 1930s. The Sudan Interior Mission, SIM, from the USA came into the country in 1928, so it came in during the same period. SIM encouraged, I should say, their converts to form their own churches instead of belonging, or I should say staying, instead of staying in the Coptic Church. And then the Bible Churchmen's Mission Society was the last Protestant group to enter Ethiopia, and they did so in 1934. All right, we proceed. By the start of the First World War in 1914, again, I hope you remember what we talked about, that in describing church history in the 20th century, we tend to take note of the disruption that took place in the First World War and the disruption that took place in the Second World War. And so we tend to bracket things in that way. So by the start of the First World War in 1914, the situation in Ethiopia was still largely the same. The main church was the Coptic Church, with the Roman Catholic Church being a distant second. Efforts by other denominations either bore very little fruit or just failed to take root, especially because of the resistance of the Coptic Church that held sway on the people. 6 Protestant missionary societies entered Ethiopia between the First and Second World War. However, during the Second World War, these were all expelled as Italy attacked Ethiopia and temporarily occupied it from, in fact I should say from here. From 1936 to 1941, Italy was a Roman Catholic nation. When the Allied forces defeated Italy just before the end of the Second World War, they reversed the expulsion and the Protestant missionary societies returned to work in Ethiopia. When the missionaries left prior to the Italian occupation, they left behind about 100 converts. But when they returned 5 years later, in 1941, they found the converts had multiplied to tens of thousands. The evangelical churches of Lutheran background, I should say, went ahead to form their own independent church under Ethiopian leadership in 1941. Later, in 1959, this church was recognized as the Ethiopian Evangelical Church of Mekane Yesus, or simply as the Mekane Yesus Church. We move to the last page, but anything there that's totally wrong and needs to be removed? Okay, let's move on. This now is coming largely to the coming in of the Pentecost. Oh, yes. Pentecostalism arrived through 3 women missionaries from the USA in March 1934, Bertha Domamuth, Ruth Shippey, and Ellen French. They returned to the USA during the Italian occupation. There was a fresh outbreak of Pentecostalism in the 1960s, so that's a good 15 years later. This was through several other Pentecostal missionaries who came from Finland in 1951 and from Sweden. And from Sweden in 1959. It influenced a lot of the student population. The first national Pentecostal church was established in 1967. It was the Full Gospel Believers Church. The now famous phrase, Pente, was initially used on these Pentecostal believers as a derogatory term. And then there's just a statement that the Mennonites arrived in Addis Ababa in 1945, where I was reading, they mentioned a lot of activities that they were involved in, but I found nothing there that I could then bring in. Then there was a coup in 1974. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church found itself stripped of political power, and in the years that followed, some of its property was confiscated. The new military rulers separated church and state in the new constitution of Ethiopia. The Derg, now, this name just popped up. I'm sure they had used it earlier in the book. Is this the new rulers? Is this the phrase they were being called? Okay. Okay, so I would say the new rulers, and then I'll say in brackets the Derg. Okay. I'll say which means committee in Gears. Thank you. That's very helpful. Took the route of communism and began to persecute Protestant churches, imprisoning church leaders and executing some of them. They confiscated church properties. The church largely went underground, and I should say until the Derg collapsed. Until the Derg collapsed in 1991. However, during the persecution, the Protestants increased in number and spread across the country, from the rural and more southern areas to the cities as well. The name Pente was now being applied to all Protestants as a self-designation and not a derogatory term. The Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, who took power in 1991, returned the confiscated buildings to the previous owners. And as you can see, that's the end. So obviously, that issue about South and West, I must have been talking about it yesterday where I went. So just a quick one. Who was leading this new revolution that took place? Okay, let's begin first of all. Who led the coup? After the coup. So it was a group together. Then Mengistu took over. And then he lasted up until the overthrow in 1991. It's sounding familiar.
I
It's sounding familiar. I think he came to Zambia for a while. But what happens with these guys is that even within the country, just hear that they are here, but you don't know where they are being kept and so on. And I think it's because they're afraid that they might end up being killed. But I think I remember something like that. There was the guy from Uganda who was overthrown. He also came to Zambia. Idi Amin went north. But there was somebody. Who did Idi Amin overthrow? I think there was an Obote, I think. He's the one who came to Zambia and lived there until he died. We just used to hear that he's around. But I think, Zimbabwe. Yes, it was Zimbabwe. That's where Mengistu went, yes. I remember we used to hear about that quite a lot as well. Okay. Yeah, so could I then add in those other denominations, the Baptist and, yeah. Okay, so let's put that in around. The church they formed is called, okay, so Meserete Christos. All right, and is the largest, is now the largest Mennonite church in the world. All right, that's helpful.